is that we have opportunities to go back and forth with colleagues from time to time and discuss what we're trying to do with students. And one of the nice things that has happened to me in Warren is meeting a faculty who seems to be very concerned with its curricula via the English department and social studies, and also being able to present to students from time to time very, very interesting guest speakers who, because of their experience in life, have helped to make maybe our world a little bit more interesting. Ray Eichenbaum is a chemist who lives in Providence, Rhode Island, married and the father of 2 sons. He is a Holocaust survivor, a former inmate of 5 Nazi concentration camps, which include Auschwitz and Mauthausen. He was born in Lodz, Poland, and came over to the United States after World War II in 1947. He's now a graduate of the University of Rhode Island and a Korean War veteran, United States Army. He is the chairman ex officio of the Holocaust Memorial Museum Organization, which he helped to found in 1986. He's also a writer. He has written 2 books and 2 plays on the subject of the Holocaust experience. It's my pleasure to introduce to you Mr. Ray Eichenbaum.
Good morning. I'm really honored to be here this morning with you, and like I told Mr. Davis, that usually I speak around in the spring when Hashoah, the commemoration of the Holocaust comes around. So this is my first time out in 1992, so you have to forgive me. I would welcome all and every question that you have about the Holocaust, because although I have a sort of formal presentation, I really enjoy fielding questions, and I think the main part of you learning from my experiences would be when you ask questions after. So just don't hold back and fire at me. A message from a Holocaust survivor. My name is Ray Eichenbaum. I'm a survivor of the Holocaust. You hear so much about the Holocaust these days. You see it on TV these days. Thousands of books are written about it. Movies and theater plays with descriptions about this event are being shown everywhere. Why do we speak an event that took place 50 years ago? We speak about it because we do not want it to happen again. Never again. Mine is a story of survival, and I'm of the opinion that there is a message in it. And it is this message which I want to impart to you. Please forgive me if I read to you, since talking extemporaneously about such sensitive to me subject takes too much out of me. I don't intend to go into great detail as to enumerate all the humanizing, horrifying experiences that I have lived through between the years 1939 and 1945. I'm so glad that I forgot, and I'm still forgetting about most of them, otherwise the burden would be too great to bear. Let's go back to the beginnings, my beginnings there. I was born some 60 years ago in Lodz, Poland, to a nice Jewish family. My parents were middle class. We had a store. I had an older sister and an older brother. Until I was 10 years old, I had a lot of fun, especially in the summer. Every summer we would go to a summer place in the country. We would go swimming, play ball, chase and catch butterflies, help the farmer with the harvest. Since this was Poland and we were Jewish, we had to keep on the quiet side. In the presence of important Poles, we the kids spoke only when we were spoken to. Only Jewish kids attended the school I was going to. It wasn't a happy existence by today's American standard, but I have good memories about those days in Poland at home amongst my family. Then one sunny day in September 1939, everything came to a crashing halt. World War II was upon us. In 10 days, Poland was overrun, and we were hostages of the Germans. We were driven into the ghetto, which was established in the old dilapidated part of town. stripped of most of our possessions, deprived of all human rights, completely uprooted. Within 10 months' time, at the age of 11, I was transformed from a child into a man. I was made to work in a factory sewing bags for Nazi soldiers. If you did not work, you would not get the bread ration and you would starve. For 3.5 years, we lived in the ghetto of Lodz in subhuman conditions as constant starvation, bitter cold in the winter, harsh treatment at work, and little hope as we saw most of Europe fall to German domination. I saw almost 200,000 people perish in the ghetto, mostly of diseases caused by malnutrition, cold, lice, beatings, and hard work under subhuman conditions. At first my grandparents died, then my mother, then my father. Somehow, by God's will or sheer luck, my sister, brother, and I survived the ghetto. Or was it willpower? We lived with the dreams of the future and the mission that somehow somebody has to survive to be able to tell our story to the world. I witnessed tragedies and scenes in the ghetto of Lodz that are too gruesome to be described. I thank God that I forgot some of these things myself. Otherwise, they'll be haunting me for the rest of my days. Then in August of 1944, we were loaded into cattle cars and taken to the dreaded Auschwitz concentration camp. When we arrived there, the women were separated from the men, and that was the last time I saw my older sister Bronya, who was like a mother to me after my mother's death. The women were led away naked with shorn hair. I was so down after this that I went into sort of a shock. It was in this kind of trauma, not caring what would happen to me. This actually helped me because I was not much affected by the happenings that were going on around me. People being shot, German and Polish criminal prisoners beating and kicking us at every step. If I'm here to tell my story, it is because of my older brother, Maurice, who 3 times, single-handedly, had saved my life in Auschwitz. I would like you to hear what I wrote about him when I went to college here at URI in 1957. I cannot read the story myself. I get all wound up inside. Therefore, I have asked Willis, one of your colleagues, to read it for me. Willis, would you come? And the story that he's reading is actually was a part of the paper that I wrote in 1957. And if you pass it around, you can see it's sort of parched by now.
A man I shall never forget. The person about whom I'm going to write is one who is very dear to me. When I think back upon the days of my early childhood, my recollections are, somehow, closely tied together with this wonderful person. Although only 4 years older than I, he was my guiding light throughout childhood. He was a slight build and not physically strong. His light blue eyes seemed to have a constant, gentle smile about them, as though they were telling of the good heart he possessed. While not too brilliant a scholar, he was, nonetheless, very intelligent and particularly practical. As very young boys, we used to play and frolic together, and I can think of many times when we were caught at things small boys are not supposed to do. I, being restless by nature, was practically always the guilty one, but he never failed to take the blame, and many times the punishment upon himself. Years passed by, and young boys became young men. As it was to become our destiny, we were engulfed by a great disaster. The mounting shadow of World War II fell upon us. We were thrown out of a normal existence into the turmoil of a horrible conflict. Because of our religion and beliefs, we became the object of a maniac's obsession. We were uprooted, dislodged from our homes, dispossessed, dishonored, and deprived of all human dignity. The despicable condition of our livelihood tended to change us into a pack of hungry, egotistical individuals who cared only for themselves. One who has not lived through an ordeal such as ours could hardly believe that circumstances could change people so completely. The more I think of those black days, the more positive I become that it was he who kept us from falling into the pit of desperation and degradation. With his courage, selflessness, and optimism, he managed to keep our last rays of hope alive. I recall that in the moments of utmost depression, depression, when everything appeared to be at an end, he was the only one of us who still retained faith. I'm sure, however, that in his own heart, he knew that our chances of survival were indeed very slim. When the Germans took away my parents, life became meaningless to me. It was he who gave me the courage and strength to go on living. Although broken-hearted himself, he pointed out to me that only by surviving could we prove that our parents' sacrifices and sufferings were not in vain. When our darkest hour arrived, during which we were sent to a German concentration camp, again, it was he who gave me the moral support which enabled me to endure living. Day by day, I saw his already frail body become gaunt and bony from malnutrition and repeated beatings. In spite of the inhuman suffering that was dealt to him, his spirit seemed to grow. No matter how much pain he was in, he always spoke of the future with unbelievable optimism. I recall several instances when, due to my apathy and indifference to life, I was on the verge of going under. I did survive, however, because he, while taking the risk of being killed himself, always managed to bail me out of almost hopeless situations. One cold wintry night in March 1945 will always stand out in my memory. A cruel Nazi camp commander gave out orders by which we were to be separated. The group of which I was a member was loaded into unheated freight cars. We were standing there, a trembling herd clothed only in some scanty summer jackets which the Germans were kind enough to provide us with. As the train was slowly pulling out of camp, I waved my final farewell to him. At this moment, he pulled his own jacket off and threw it to me. As long as I live, I shall never forget his trembling, frail figure standing there, waving. The long-awaited day of liberation arrived, but he was not among those who survived to see it. On the 3rd day of May, 1945, 2 days before World War II ended, he was killed by Germans. This self-sacrificing and wholly good man was and will always remain as my ideal. He was my brother.
Thank you, Will. It was a beautiful rendition. As you see, it is really not a credit to me that I survived. There were many other cases where he really saved my life, and if you look at a survivor, there's probably so many circumstances and so many people had actually a part in saving that person's life. It's not really due to his own credit. Now you probably will say, so what is a jacket? The jacket is nothing to us. But don't forget, we were only given one jacket, and when the Nazi that was in charge of him, when they found him without a jacket, he got a beating or whatever. You can just imagine. So you see, to you, it might just seem like he threw a jacket to me because I was shivering and but it was much more. He really sacrificed for me. As you see, he was a real hero. I owe my life to him. It might not be known to you that actually very few people stayed in Auschwitz long. You either went somewhere else or you were killed. There were these so-called selections at which Nazi industrialists would come and select their slaves for work from the healthy men who were not destroyed right away. At first such selection, they picked my brother, but not me. I was just a boy, short and skinny. Too short, but now I'm fat. You can imagine my resignation and despair when they sent me back to my block, where I would have for sure been taken next day into the gas chamber. Imagine my surprise when I woke next morning to find my brother next to me. He could not stand to be separated from his younger brother, thus he stole himself back into our block at a great danger to his life because he was already showered and disinfected to go on a work transport. He for sure would have been killed by the cleanliness conscious crazy Germans. Next day, God's help, we were both selected to go on a work transport to a coal mine in Silesia. Since I was small and quick, they used me to place dynamite sticks in the drilled holes in the low shafts of the mine. My brother worked as a grinding wheel operator in the metal shop. How we survived there, only God knows, because He protected us. I started to spit up blood. Every day I thought that this was the end, but somehow I survived. As the year 1945 drew near, they marched us out of the camp one day on foot. For miles, we walked across the Oder River, and finally we came to a siding where they loaded us into open cattle cars again in the middle of winter.
Mrs. Weaver?
Yes.
And they dragged us for days without any food or necessities to the Mauthausen concentration camp in Austria. More starvation, beatings, and work in underground bunkers making artillery shells for Nazi cannons. And then the worst, the separation from my beloved brother, Maurice. They sent him to Ebensee while I went to Melk. It was as if predetermined because my dear brother perished there, as if the Almighty did not want me to see him die. We suffered until finally on May 6, 1945, I was liberated by black soldiers of the U.S. Army Transportation Corps. I weighed 52 pounds, and having learned that my brother was no longer alive, I did not actually want to go on living. But after 3 months in a hospital, I started to recover, and my inborn optimism brought me back to willpower to live. Yeah, I still recall the first American soldier was a black man in the transportation corps, and somehow we crawled to the road from those. They put us like in a log camp deep into the woods in Austria, and the minute we saw that there was no SS guarding us, we started to crawl towards the road, and you saw those big, tremendous vans. And I tell you the truth, I never saw a black man before in my life. That was the first time I saw Americans. And I recall that they threw me a candy bar, I think it was Fifth Avenue or something like that, you know, and that was the first taste of America I had. And then I still recall that they were throwing baseball with a glove and so on, and I sort of wondered what kind of creatures are these. I never saw a baseball glove or heard about the game, and everything was so strange about these people. But these were our liberators. I'll be remiss if I would not at this opportunity to say something about the current trends among young people. We hear so much about teenage suicide and drugs these days. As one who has faced death so many times in my life, I would like to stress to you the fact that there is nothing as precious as life. Having been so close to dying, almost in the ashes, I saw people cling to life by all means possible. I saw mothers trying to exchange pieces of gold for thin slices of bread to be able to keep alive their starving children. I saw others burrow in the ground, trying to retrieve scraps of potato peels which were buried there. Anything to prolong life, to stay alive, another day, another hour. Also, the fact that I was cuddled by the grown-ups around me is a confirmation of life. The older people knowing that their future is so unsure, and also knowing that someone has to survive, supported the youngest who they thought had the best chance of survival. Therefore, when I hear of teenage suicide in the USA, and I consider taking drugs an equal to committing suicide, I think it's almost profane to consider suicide here. Life is an opportunity. It's also a responsibility. We are here in this world to continue the life cycle, the process of evolution itself. We are the little link which makes the large chain of life possible. We have no right to interrupt this chain prematurely. I know that today's youth is under a lot of pressure, peer pressure, parent pressure, money pressure, but to consider suicide or being on drugs, and I consider being on drugs animal existence anyway. I think it's criminal. Don't ever consider it. No matter what the circumstances, just think and say to yourselves, here I hear of people who try to cling to the last slight opportunity to live, and I am to take this precious gift and destroy it myself. There cannot be reason enough to do this, ever. You'll probably be wondering how I managed to survive the Holocaust. Sometimes I hardly believe this myself, that somehow I did it. And suffice to say that by a miracle or maybe random happening, I'm here to tell my story. I think that there were these factors which contributed to my surviving these ordeals, namely, in order of importance. 1. The willpower to live. 2. Inborn optimism. 3. To believe in God. 4. Refusal to give in to animalistic tendencies. I would like to explain these factors a bit more. The willpower to live. During my travails, there was many a moment where I felt I should give in. There is no use, I said to myself many times. It appeared that everything was against us. But somehow seeing so many people die around me gave me the feeling of tremendous responsibility, that someone had to survive. Otherwise, our enemies would have reached their devilish goals. There were times when I was physically at the end. I weighed only 52 pounds on the day of liberation. However, I drove myself day after day to survive against tremendous odds. Inborn optimism. I guess you have to be born with it. It influences your daily existence, and it allows you to see the light at the end of the tunnel, even if the tunnel is 100 miles long. Having a happy childhood until the age of 10 also probably contributed to my optimistic nature. Having read many books at an early age also must have helped. To believe in God. This factor is the hardest to explain, was with me throughout my suffering. I probably did not have as many doubts and questions as the grown-up around me. However, to my dying day, I will believe that as if a magic hand hovered over me and protected me during the years of my travails. An appreciation of ethics in life. You might wonder how in a dire need, as in the Holocaust, ethics come into play. I believe that this feeling was one of the main contributions to my survival. I refused to be dragged down to the animal level. I did not steal, lie, cheat, or squeal, although this was common behavior all around me. We always had lice those days, and how I hated them. I recall that even in the harshest days of winter, I still washed in cold water just to keep clean, to fight off the lice. I also refrained from eating strange foods, such as dog meat, as was common practice. I rather went hungry and dreamed of happy days. Many of you might ask, why is this man talking to us about a subject which is so painful for him to talk about? Why is he pouring out his heart and soul to us? The answer is simple. I want you to learn. Learn from my experiences. You are the future. If I can make an impression on you and make you see how inhuman one group of people can be to another, a catastrophe such as the Holocaust might happen never again. That is the primary singular reason why I am addressing you today. Also, I want you to bear witness for the future. We hear these days ugly insinuations that the Holocaust never happened, that the fact that 6 million Jews and 5 million other innocents perished is not true. This we, the survivors, cannot bear. It is not that we Jews wanted the world to feel sorry for us. This is not it at all. And the Israeli armies in 1967 and 1973 proved to the world, once for all, that being strong and self-reliant is to be preferred to a state of suffering which evokes the sympathy of the world. However, it is painful for us to hear such insinuation, because if the world is to believe, it would mean that all the sufferings and deaths and sacrifices were all in vain. It is a feeling as if our hostages in Iran, probably you still recall the hostages in Iran we had a few years ago, not only did not come home, the hostages, but as someone would say that they were not taken hostage at all. 6 million people perished, 6 million Jews and 5 other Armenians. Family, friends, little children, and they tell us that they never existed. How macabre. That is why I want you to bear witness for the future. When you get older, you'll be able to say, I listened to a Holocaust survivor. I heard it with my own ears. You'll talk to your children about it when they will study the subjects in school. And by this means, we'll all make this world a better, a more humane place to live in. You might ask how I feel about Germans in Germany after all that has happened to me. Being a victim of Nazi brutality, you would think that I must blindly hate anything that has to do with Germany. It isn't that simple. I despise Nazism with all my heart and soul. I get very upset when I hear about the American Nazi Party and other lunatic fringe elements like them. However, I admire the real contributions that Germany has made to this world. German music, poetry, literature, science. I love Beethoven and Goethe and Bach. I enjoy plays by Heine and Lessing. I take my head off to a culture that produced the Einstein and the Mozart and the VW. Also German engineering, they make the best cars in the world. That is why to my dying day I'll never understand how people like the people of Germany, people with culture and high moral standards, could sell their soul to scoundrels like Hitler, Goering, Goebbels, and the rest of that clique. Therefore, young people, learn from me. I do not hate blindly. I cannot hate blindly because if I would be like the Nazis. They hated us blindly. And this human tendency should be eradicated from the human race forever. This morning I would like to leave you with the following advice. Do not follow your leaders blindly. Examine what they tell you. Make sure that what they advocate does not conflict with your conscious beliefs or what is right. Nazi Germany became a monstrosity because intelligent human beings were persuaded by demagogues to believe and follow the wrong ideals. Speak out for what you believe is right. Do not become a passive witness and permit the wrong ideology to become the law of the land. Abstaining from controversial issues is as if you would vote for the wrong side. Many a good German shut their eyes from what was going on, and this permitted Hitler and his murderers to assume power. Do not become intoxicated by success. If any of you will become leaders among your peer group, remember, leadership is a heavy burden. You'll have to act responsibly and make sure that your leadership is not misguided and leads in the wrong direction. The experiences of the Holocaust show that many a good man or woman became a cruel beast when he or she assumed a higher position and became spoiled by success. And above all, love your fellow man. If you follow this traditional advice, a cataclysm such as the Holocaust will be barred from this our beloved country forever. I hope that my talk this morning will bring forth one lasting impression on you, that despite the dehumanizing experience of the Holocaust, here is one survivor who is optimistic and who believes that what we can learn from the Holocaust will contribute to the evolution of people into a better mankind. I thank you.
Okay, Mr. Eichenbaum will take any of your questions now if you want. Go ahead.
Yeah, you better ask questions because I've booked you. I can read forever. Yeah.
I was wondering if you stood trial in any of the German trials that they had to
mean
the
the
German
Nuremberg?
generals pay for what they had done, the war crime. Have you stood in any of those trials?
No, I mean, I was kind of young and I was too busy trying to recover, when the things happen. I think they happened very fast, too fast, There was a lot of politics, the Russians and the and the Americans and the British, they all sort of were tugging in different directions, and I think, although they tried to do a thorough job in Nuremberg and they passed quite a few good laws, etc., I think that it was done too fast, and not that I'm a vengeful person, etc., but it's a sort of a precedent-setting, as you know, trials, and the many people were let go, and without finding out their true story, and the main thing is, like some people say, look, I've been given an order, and I had to shoot people, that's the way it is in the army. But I was in the American Army too, and I did some unpleasant duties too, but I made sure that if I did it one time, I went to the Inspector General next day and I say, look, I did it yesterday, but it's against my conscience, and I'm not going to do it tomorrow. You see, and that's what should have been learned from this trial, that even if you are given orders to do unjust things, you cannot do it just in pass the responsibility to the people above you, because this doesn't work. As we know from his history, that doing this, we have a brutal world, and especially for you young people who are used to different things, we can no longer do that. Even as you see winning the war here and there, you get stuck with a burden. You supposedly did the right thing, but it does not work. Even as a victor, you are actually vanquished because the responsibility falls on you. Is this what you were leading up to? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mrs. King said that you had been to 5 camps. Did you escape from them, or did they move you? No?
No, I did not escape. They moved me. Yeah, I think people in America have this sort of TV approach to the story of the Holocaust, that everybody could do what they wanted, and sort of escape was just an option. But it wasn't like that at all. Don't forget, we were a minority. We were ostracized not only by the Germans and the Gestapo and so, but by the local populations as well. There were many traitors and many people who were at the service of the Germans. And don't forget that Germany, when I was in, they was the greatest might ever assembled by a man, even greater than Alexander the Great or Hannibal or whoever in history. Don't forget, they at one point, from the bottom of Marseille, France, from the bottom of France up to the Urals in the Caucasus, they were the masters of the greatest mass of territory ever known in history. And they had a great organization. If you think that everything was like Stalag 17 or what's the other show?
Heroes.
Hogan's Heroes. It wasn't so at all. Believe me, they were well organized, and they knew how to keep their prisoners, and nobody escaped. The only people that escaped that I knew came back, and they hung them. And I witnessed many hangings, and that makes quite an impression on you. Believe me, and you're very reluctant to escape then, even try. So I think it's sort of fallacious. I hate to disappoint you, but it wasn't like Hogan's Heroes at all. In other words, we were kept, and we were downtrodden, and we had very little hope. We could not organize. There was people, in times of hunger, they had many informers. They had, for a loaf of bread, they could buy anybody almost. So as you see, it was almost impossible to organize many resistances. That's why we have to give that much credit to people of Warsaw or Sobibor or some. They actually did the impossible, and as you probably know, that very few people survived, maybe 1 or 2%, even that. So unfortunately, we had very little. I remember in the Ghetto Lodge, we were. It's in my book. One night we were trying to organize. We were in a square area of about 12 square miles, and we were working for the Germans in factories. And we saw that, not me, I was small, but the older people, that we were given smaller and smaller rations to live, and people started to get TB, tuberculosis, and die. So we decided to make a demonstration one time to where the Germans were on Balitsky Rynek in the middle of town. So before, it was all set for Sunday because we didn't work on Sunday. And don't you know that we had a leader, our own, his name was Rumkowski, and he was sort of a German hireling. He started out to do good, but eventually he went the way of a Quisling. So don't you think that Saturday night he took out all our leaders from bed and sent them to Auschwitz? We were leaderless. By the time we wanted to demonstrate just for higher rations. to march and demand higher rations for our work. And even this was not permitted because the Krumkovsky took out our leaders the night before out of bed and sent them on to Auschwitz. The pathetic story is about that is that the people that he sent to Auschwitz ahead, they were waiting for him when he arrived because he was a Jew too. And one of the latest transports in 1944, this man arrived in Auschwitz and he was kicked and burned alive by the people that he sent out ahead. So as you see, there were cruel times. And to resist was not that easy as you might. As far as your question, yeah, I was always moved. I went, as the Russian front, came near, I was at Auschwitz, and then I worked in a coal mine in Silesia in Germany, and as the Russians came nearer, they would drag us with us into another camp, at first to Austria and Mauthausen, then to Melt, then to Gunskirchen, and back. So you see, we were always sort of dragged. Yeah.
Okay, yesterday in class, we received a map that had all the camps, and there was, I was just wondering the difference between a murder camp, a concentration camp, or a death camp. What's the difference?
Now, there's a difference between an extermination camp and a concentration camp. Some of them, the ones that had crematoria and gas chambers, were the extermination camps. In other words, they had no provisions for people to work in those camps. They were just sort of what it says, destruction camps. And people that worked there were just, employed to kill people and do away with the bodies. The other camps had like some working facilities, and people could, still work for them. And the most pathetic thing is that most of these extermination camps were built in Poland, on the territory of Poland, although Poland was divided. Part of it belonged to the Reich and part of it was not. And the thing is, why did the Germans make all these camps in Poland? Now there's many stories on that. I think it's probably maybe coincidental. I want to hope so, but some other people say that they knew that the Poles were quite receptive to to do away with Jews and so on, but I do not believe so. I don't want to believe it because I think there were many good Poles who saved many a Jewish life, and I would think that it's just coincidental. Maybe the Germans counted on it, but I don't think that it was just done intentionally. I mean, that the Poles had anything to do with it. Yeah.
How about the general population? Were they aware of these camps? Just the
You mean the Polish or German?
Polish or German people?
I think they must have been aware. I'm not saying 100%, but probably up to 70% of the population was aware. Because I remember that, if there's people being destroyed, it's not just like that. There's evidence, there's clothes. And I remember there's trucks going back and forth with all kinds of shoes and clothes. And we could even, in the ghetto where I was, there was like they built bridges over streets. The streets had streetcars going from the little suburbs to the downtown, okay?
Please pardon the interruption. I have one brief announcement. Mr. Tui, period 1 class, and Ms. Figueredo, period 1 class, will report to study this morning. Thank you.
So we would essentially we would walk, instead of disrupting traffic of the streetcars, they built wooden bridges across these streets. And we would see the traffic underneath, and there was all the time clothes and shoes and things that would remind you that where are the people that wore them, you understand? And don't forget that Poland per se had almost 30% the Jewish population, and in Germany there were maybe 12% Jews, and if a part of the population disappears, people started to see less and less of us around, and it would be fallacious to think that they didn't give, they didn't notice. You know what I mean?
It's also
Yeah.
not just anti-Semitic, but wasn't it also an economic move on the part of Hitler to revive the economy through slave labor?
Oh, I don't know. I think it's a question of politics, and I think it became. I think we were into the war about 43. I think this man, I think his name was Schacht, or no, the other man was. He became the czar of the industry there, right? And he sort of said, look, what you know, they were running out of laborists and so on. He said, why not employ these people on the way out? And this would be not only a way to produce something, but also to get rid of them. This is an old sort of Roman way. They used to get rid of people by working them to death too, you know. So they try to copy that, you know. And I think that maybe there was some humanistic element in it too. The story of our ghetto is really amazing. You probably, when you grow up, you hear about the ghetto of Lodz because the story is sort of continuing. We were the longest ghetto allowed to exist, almost 4 years, and we were sort of autonomous, and we produced goods for them. And the story was like that some smart people in the ghetto, they made it so enticing for them. We were in so many industries. We would make boxes for ammunition and pieces of work of arts. You know, and we worked quite hard and we delivered quite a number of goods. Matter of fact, they hit it like an accounting office. We wouldn't get any food. You deliver so many truckloads of this and that, and you get so many truckloads of potatoes. So it became quite an industry in the ghetto. And that's how we survived for 4.5 years. And matter of fact, our leaders would have they would bribe some of the Wehrmacht officers, and they would get new orders. And I hear there's records that if not Himmler promised to the Gauleiter of the Lodz ghetto, we might have even survived intact until the end of the war. But Himmler promised that he's going to make this part of Poland Judenrein without any Jews. And in the very end, in the end of 1944, this became a fact, and they liquidated the ghetto because he made that promise. But so as you see, we were quite a useful bunch to them, and at one time they even would send people from the neighboring areas to reinforce us. They would send Jews from the other ghettos into our ghetto to replenish the people who perished, etc. Yeah.
Was there any one of your family or relatives that were in the camp with you?
To survive?
Well, that was in the camp with you, except your brother, other than your
No,
brother.
you know, they would. My sister was also survived the ghetto, but we were separated in Auschwitz. The women went to one side, and I was, you know, with the man. So I didn't see him. Yes.
Do you know whatever happened to your sister?
Yeah. This is the book that I wrote about her. A memorial for Branya. My sister's name was Branya. And she went to Auschwitz, and I saw her. Like I told you, they were taking the naked women away, and the last time I saw her was, you know, shorn hair. And I tell you, girls, the girls look almost the same. When you're shorn and naked, you look the same. But I spotted her, you know, way in the distance, and I saw her being led away, you know. I don't think if it's complimentary or not, but it's a fact. So I know that she survived Auschwitz, and then after the war, I met a woman who recognized my last name. She said, Eichenbaum. Yeah, I was with a girl. She was a nurse from Lodz. Yeah. And I was trying to interrogate her, and then she sort of clamped up, and she says, she was in a camp at Stutthof. They sent her to a camp in North Germany. And then at the war's end, they took the girls and put them on an old boat and they torpedoed the boat and left it to sink in the North Sea. And the last time she supposedly saw my sister was when she was handing out some girls to some Danish fishermen that came about. But she didn't make it. And she said she was spitting up blood already and she had TB. So that's the only thing I know about my sister. Yeah.
I'm Danish. You went to the camp in Austria. Did any of the Danish Red Cross buses ever arrive to that camp?
Danish or Swedish, I think. There was one case where I was in a camp in Melk in Austria. And by the way, it's a beautiful, if you ever go traveling in Europe, go on the Danube River and you come, especially take a little boat ride, and you come to the castle at Melk. It's a beautiful one of these, like you see in Bavaria, one of these up on top, beautiful castles. And I remember being in the camp below, and we would look up and see that beautiful castle while we were really laboring and starving. But to go back to you, when I was in Melk, I remember they sent a group of Polish, not Jewish kids. They were between the ages of maybe 12 and 16. And I think they were children of the Polish intelligentsia that maybe they killed the Germans or something. But anyway, somebody kept account of them, and they were in that camp. And I was Polish, and these boys were Polish, and we became good friends, and I was part of them, matter of fact. But then one day we saw, that was already in March of 1945, and a delegation of the Red Cross, Swedish and Danish, came to the camp in Melk, and they took out the Polish boys, from the camp. And I remember that they said, why don't you sort of try to blend in with us and stay as a Polish boy? And I had to make a decision right then and there. But somehow I said no, and I looked at my suffering compatriots and I said, I was born a Jew and I'm going to stay. But that's how I remember. The Swedish Red Cross did come in, and just before the war ended, about a couple of months. Yes.
After you were free, after the war ended, where did you go? Did they just kind of let you go and it was up to you where you went?
As I told you, I crawled out from the road, and we were about 8 fellows, younger fellows, when we crawled out to the road, and some of them, there was a big warehouse with sugar and cans of meat. And if you don't eat for quite a while, your stomach lining is gone, and would you believe it, the next day 6 of us died of dysentery because they ate sugar and too much of it, when you're starved and so on, and your stomach lining, and they had awful dysentery and they died. Fortunately, again, something directed me. I crawled into some kind of DP camp, and the first meal I had on the good side was noodles with milk, and that probably saved my life. But most of us ended up in hospitals, and when you weigh 52 pounds, it's kind of emaciated. It was 3 months, I think, I was in a lazaret, and then I came out.
Do you ever connect with any of your relatives at all, or find out where they were, or anybody survived? Was
The
related
only
to you?
one was an uncle of mine that we all thought he was dead, that he was trying to run away to Russia, and somehow he survived, and he was in Siberia, so he suffered from Hitler and from Stalin. He was in Vorkuta, in the gulags, and so on. That's the only survivor. And I also have a cousin in Israel who survived, and he just, like me, by a miracle, working here and there, and somehow. It's just random. Yeah.
Where did you go after the lazaret?
After what?
After you've gone to the hospital, where did you go?
Yeah, then there was an organization called UNRWA, I think it's still there, and there was a nice lady, American captain in the American Army, and she sort of took me under her wings, and she directed me to, I had a choice to go to Israel or to America, but somehow I didn't have the strength to go and fight again. So I came to America through her, through the UNRWA in 1947.
I don't have a question, but I would like you to, if you recall, and it's not too painful, if you could describe to the group what it would be like to get up, what the procedure was, what time, describe the area in which you lived and with how many. Could you do that?
Yeah, sure.
After all, some of these kids, and myself included, had their own bedroom for many years.
No, there were many different places, not just in the transit camps, like in Mauthausen, was undescribable. Sometimes we were so many into a room that we would have to sit like, you know, you sit and you spread your legs, and the next person sort of sits the same way like you, like sort of triangles, and that's the way they could squeeze about 300 people into one room. Sometimes we had to, but this was only like 2 or 3 nights, maybe tops. But otherwise, we had bunks, 1, 2, 3 or something, and there was electricity, but the lights were very dim, and we were chased out sort of 5:30 in the morning, and go to the Appellplatz, you know, the main square where they would count us. They would count us forever, you know, make sure that nobody escaped and so on. And then finally it started to dawn, and they divided us into work groups. You go to the coal mine, you go here, you work to clean up the rooms, you clean up the latrine, etc. And so that's how our food was. We were given a pot of, small pot of ersatz coffee, black stuff, and a ration of bread, dark bread, and a piece of margarine. This was for the day. So then you would go to work, and at work you would get a soup, a sort of a juicy type of cabbage soup. If you're lucky, you had a potato swimming in it, And at work we did different things. Like I told you, I worked in a coal mine. I was an expert potato peeler. When I was lucky, they would assign me to the kitchen, and to this day, my wife still wonder how I can peel potatoes that fast, because you have to be the fastest to do that. So you see, something comes through in life do you good. But so we would receive our midday meal at work. Then you work from 12:30 to 5:30 or so, and then they would round you up and march you back to camp, and again the countless count-offs, etc. And you get only coffee at night. If you didn't retain any bread for your night's meal, that was too bad. And that was about it. And the washing quarters were very primitive. It was just a spigot, and you had to wash in cold water, etc. Sometimes once a month they would take us to take a shower in a bigger camp, but this was the worst, because we never know if we ever going to come back. Sometimes they kept you, and you went to the gas chambers, and at that point there were doctors, and they would look you over, and it's just, you rather washed in the cold water, and you didn't look forward too much to taking that shower once a month. And things were very, very primitive, and there was trading going on. Some people were smokers. I remember they would trade their bread for half a cigarette, and so on. These people were very poor, one addicted to smoking. I recall that. I don't know if
Yes, you did.
sometimes it
Yes.
escaped me
Yeah.
through my own experiences, but as I recall, there were many sort of taboos and hang-ups, that you had to stay away from selections. You didn't want to have anything to do. You didn't want to stick out, or that they would notice that you have any defect. If you lived, you try to cover up, because you were trying to present the
Perfect. No, just men.
Always never was a woman. But no, but like I said, they were cuddling us, and they were trying to, when there were selections, they would send, people would sort of make sure that you have a kitchen detail so they wouldn't see you, and so, But this was a game of every day we played a game.
Recently in the news, and I'm sorry the names escape me, a gentleman was arrested for being at one of the death camps, and it's come to light that perhaps they have the wrong man.
Yeah,
How do you feel about situations of this sort where they, naturally everybody's identity is questionable after all these years, but when someone professes to be so innocent after all these years, and then come to find out that they may have in fact taken the wrong person. How do you feel about that?
I'm really ambivalent. I think the justice should be done, and just because a number of years have passed, this still doesn't take away the guilt of the man. If he was a henchman and did, take away many lives with any scruples and did it sort of sadistic way, he should be punished. But I have no special vengeance. I think, like I say, the only thing good about it is that we should finally learn that it's like I said before, that just because somebody gives you an order to kill somebody, that doesn't give you the absolute right to do that, and it's still your conscience that you should go by that. And you see, so if we learn even by this that people cannot sort of lawlessly, take away lives just because somebody told you so, this would be a great progress from last time. But as far as your own identity, you can't blame people. People are the ones who testified it. You think that they testified wrong, but sometimes after so many years, probably people look the same, and
Well, they all change.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yes.
I have a question. At the outbreak of crystal meth, Night of Broken Glass, this of course happened in Germany. You were a child living in Poland. Did word come to Poland that there was an uprising and 2 full days of pogroms in Germany at that time?
Oh yeah. Matter of fact, I recall that I was still a happy kid playing soccer, when all this happened in '38. But naturally, we were starting to feel the pinch. Country next to us, the powerful country to the northeast, northwest. And I only recall that in 1938 they started to send the first transport of foreign Jews that lived in Germany who had no passports or something, and they sent them to the Polish borders, and we sort of received them. And I just wrote an article about that, if you recall, in the Herald, that how poor they were, these people. Not only, all of a sudden they were sort of disgorged from their own country. Here they thought themselves they were a super race and so on. They were Germans. They had Europe was shaking, in front of them, and all of a sudden they were sort of disgorged because they were Jewish. So here they were, didn't speak any Polish language, and sort of thrown into our kind of lives, and we were not too welcome. We didn't welcome them too much because they were sort of thought themselves superior to the Polish people, and so their lot was quite miserable. I still recall there was a fellow, his name was Friedrich, and I played soccer with him, and he was a good soccer player. And I remember that I asked him, do you go to school? There was still a year, between 38 and 39. And he says, yeah, he tried to go, but the Polish language is just too hard for him to learn. And so they tried to organize schools for these refugees and so on, but very few of them really had any life at all. And they lived in a in gymnasium, in a school gymnasium on cots for a long period of time, and these people were really thrown out of a very normal type of existence right into a hell. There was Poland, for them. But Nazi, then very soon when Hitler attacked us, we became equal.
Yeah, that was during shit time back.
Yes.
I was just wondering what happened to you when you came to the United States. Did you go to an orphanage?
Yeah, at first, I came to New York, and then they shipped us to Chicago, to an orphanage. And I was there for maybe a month on the west side of Chicago. And, now there's very few orphanages, but I was quite attached to this little orphanage. There were Nazi people, children from broken homes, etc. But I thought it was great. But then there was a family in Providence who wanted to adopt the boy. So that's how they shipped me back here. And I came here in 1947. I went to Hope High School and here ever since, although we did live in New Jersey when I was married and my kids were born in New Jersey. Yeah.
Anti-Semitism has ebbed and flowed over the centuries. Why do you think it was so intense at this time as opposed to another time? Why was there such intensity?
It was just scapegoatism. The big picture is that Hitler, he had to feed the masses with some kind of paranoia, and he used he always. Matter of fact, I'm reading a book now where he says that he only went that as long as he can remember, generation after generation, people hated the Jews. Now he lets out the religious angle, etc. And he says there must be something that they are like learning and so on. And so he used all kinds of sort of metaphors, but underneath you can see that it was only a scapegoatism. That while he did his dirty work and took away all the people's, civil rights, he would feed them. He blamed the Jews for this and that. There was strictly no basis for whatsoever. But don't forget he came to power when there was great unemployment and great dissatisfaction after the First World War, and he used the political advice to the utmost. And as you see, he really built up the cannons, and then he had to go to war. And again, he already committed himself in the war against the Jews so far that there was no way to backtrack. Matter of fact, I read somewhere that when the final solution finally came, which is 1942, they had this Wannsee conference and all, that actually he was not so much to destroy all the Jews, but once they put the proposal in front of him, he could not backtrack, and he had to approve it. So as you see, there were many things that sometimes you start something that you probably have no intentions, not that I'm justifying him whatsoever, but he did not want to, destroy supposedly outright, to exterminate. But once he started the process, there was no way out.
Was it automatic, like the extermination of the handicapped or the insane? Was that automatic extermination for them at that time?
Yes, I think that's how they learned how to do away with people, was through euthanasia. And, the Germans are, very industrious people, and to them, you have to be productive. If you're not productive, you eat bread for nothing. They don't like that. There's no such thing as, great emphasis on art, although they were great artists at one time, but you have to be productive and you have to justify your existence. And once you think in those terms, all those roads open up to do away with old people, with disabled, with, behaviorally especially. I never forget the first thing that the Germans did when they came into the ghetto. We had an asylum, and they sent in I think a couple of squadrons of sharpshooters, and they took up positions around that little yard, and they let out the mental people, and they just picked them up like animals. So So you see, that was the Oberrasse, you know, the special race that. But for them, anything, the ends justify the means, and once you have this kind of, they learned it at euthanasia. Probably there are many good books, you know, about this, that they would have those sort of black cars, and they would pick up people who showed signs of mental disorders, and they would, you know, and the people were missing those people, and they said, where did they go with the black cars? And the black car became a symbol of death, you know, even before the war broke out in Germany.
When you see pictures of the concentration camps, people seem like almost drugged. They're just, you know, passive, not even any movement. You mentioned, like, when they got back, like, at 5 o'clock, was there any, what was social life like? What was the interaction among prisoners like? Was it really the question of people snitching and trying to get advantage over others, or was there any kind of social interaction?
Oh, yeah, we try to, you know, encourage each other. I mean, the people, there was actually snitching, and there was kind of primitive life through. You know, everybody had to look out for his own piece of bread and so on, you know. But beside this, I think it was great encouragement that people would, rumor production was a great influence, you know. In other words, I think that if not the rumors, we would have probably very, not as many would have survived. You know, we would almost produce false rumor, you know, facts just to preserve our sanity and say, you know, when the Germans were winning all over, you know, you had to sort of, so when you saw some kind of clothes being shipped back, you say, oh, the Germans finally got their first defeat way before Stalingrad, and you know, and we, in every little thing we try to read something bad into it, you see, but so that's what we would talk about. We would talk about what happened at work, maybe, you know, when they would laugh, we would cry. If they would cry, we started to laugh on the inside, you know. So that's how it was. You had a question, right?
Yeah. Through your years in the camps, didn't you miss out on a lot of education?
Well, yes.
So when you came back here, where did you have to pick up in order to become a chemist?
Yeah, I still think that I missed 5 years of math, because it haunts me to this day, believe me. And yes, I didn't go to school from, there was still school in the ghetto in 1940 until the outbreak of the Russian-German war. And we would drudge on foot and, you know, to a little schoolhouse in the ghetto. But then there was no more school until I came to Providence in 1947. From 39, yeah.
I want to ask you, how much news was infiltrating into the concentration camps when you were there from outside? Did you know a lot that was happening? How did the news get in?
Oh,
And what happened, and also, one more question, if the person was caught to have been giving news, what would happen to him or her?
As far as the news, the only source that we really had was we used to work with the German or Polish foremen, you know, at work, let's say in the coal mine. There was still we were only the slave labor, and there were the workers who, you know, the ones with the lights and so on. They would, so through them we would get some news, and although they were kind of giving orders not to say anything. But here and there was a scrap of paper, newspaper, and so that's how it was smuggled in. And you know, if there was great news, they would brag about it, so we know of that, you know, where they were winning all over. And otherwise, I don't even recall we knew a calendar. We knew the dates. We knew Sunday we didn't work. But like people asked me if I knew about the Jewish holidays. We didn't even have a calendar, you know, to really know what falls on what, you know. You see. And as far as punishing, I don't know if this was such an offense at that point to know. But I guess once they were doing badly, then they would take it out on us, you know. I recall once we were in Auschwitz when we came, there was a bombing. Actually, the British were bombing Monowitz. There was a Buna-Werke, you know, not far from Auschwitz. And I recall we were in the street Then all of a sudden we heard machine gun fire, and you know, we were in the barracks on the side, and when we heard this, we started to bravo. We started to clap, you know, and you should see how the SS, how angry. They started to shoot, and we had to run into the barracks because they would have picked us off. But that was like a resistance. If this wasn't resistance, I don't know. You were imprisoned, and here they bomb you, and you clap bravo, and they try to hide, and you are not afraid. You see? So it was quite a sight. I still recall it, that we were, at least we said, if we get killed by the bombs, it's all right. It's an Allied bomb, you know. Yeah.
In the end, in 1945, were you aware of that the Allies were that close, or did it come as a surprise when suddenly one day the gas was gone?
To me, I didn't know. Like I said, they dragged us into this sort of Lincolnesque log camp in Gunskirchen in Austria, and we didn't know anything. The only thing we knew, they exchanged the SS for the Volkssturm, for old German guards. And the guards were not Nazis, you know. They said, look, if you run away, I have to shoot you. These are my orders. But otherwise, you know, try to, you know, there were 45-year-old men who were guarding us. And you could hear the line, you know, the artillery firing, that the front was coming near, you know, etc. But otherwise, you know, I really did not know. There was very full communication, especially when you're deep in the woods, the way they kept us.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm not going to stop you. You can keep going, but I have a meeting. I want to thank him for taking time out of his day. And I see a message here, and that's, you know, next time you girls have a little trouble picking hair in your morning with getting that spray to get it in the right location, and you guys are picking out sneakers and you can't get the right size Adidas or color and whatnot. That's just something to reflect on, that there are other people in the world that are having some very difficult times, and I think we should think about them once in a while. And number two, that you can make a difference. As a classic example, he was 52 pounds back in 1947, and he's here, and I think making a difference just by talking to you and sharing this history. Thank you for coming, and we appreciate you. Okay, continue on.
Yeah, by the way, our clothes, you know, what we wore consisted of wooden sort of shoes, which were, by the way, which are great for winter, you know, but not with the soles were that thick, just a piece of wood with a cloth over it, okay? And we had no socks. We would wear newspaper. Instead of stockings or socks, you know, we would just, if you were lucky, you could exchange you find some brown paper bag or something, and you put it on your feet, and this were your socks. And we had the striped uniforms, and they exchanged them maybe once in 2 months. You could exchange them, and it was cold, and that was our clothes, and we had no underwear, nothing, you know, just the way God made you, and just the one uniform that you had, and that was yours. So things were really primitive. And just to prevent our escaping, they took and made with clippers, and made like an alley here. So even if you try to escape, people would know that you have some kind of funny hair. So they knew you were prisoners. You know. So.
Well, when they called out your number for like extermination, how could you get away with that? How could you? Were people trying to hide from that?
They didn't call out numbers usually. Sometimes they did, but mostly they just did it by at this Appellplatz, and they say this group go here, you know, you go here, stand there, and just at the spur of the moment like that.
Well, what did they use that numbering system for?
The numbering system was when they kept you, the initial selection in Auschwitz. Like I have a number. I was given. There's another story about the number. You see, I have Birkenau 10308. My brother had 10307. So at least when you came to Auschwitz, when you went to the good side, they registered you. This way they knew how many thousand workers there is, etc. And But once they send you away from Auschwitz, I don't think they kept, you had a number or so, you know. You had a number here, but they didn't go by this numbering that much, you know. They just, we had triangles, you know. The red one was a political, and green was criminal, and black, and such, etc. So, but I don't recall that they really used the numbering that closely. Yeah.
Have you ever thought of getting that number removed just to like whip away the memories that it brings back?
Yeah, first I did when I was young, but later on I think it's a badge of honor, sort of, by now. I just got it thought from my mind. I said, you know, this what, yeah, I wanted to tell you that when we were given this number, it was sort of dark in the afternoon, and my brother was older, and we were already on the good side. We were selected for work, and we were standing to get those numbers. You know, this is done with a hot pen or something, and they go like that. The prisoners were doing it there, and so he was given a number, and all of a sudden the German SS, he says, "Du bist zu klein, geh weg." You know, he although I was already selected to go on transport, he still, I don't know why, he says, you are too small, and so on. So, and I wanted to be with my brother to get that number. So I remember the German would walk up and down, you know, and there was like in Disney World with sort of roped off area, and my brother was there, and he coached me. He says, "You see, when he goes there, you crawl across." And sure enough, when it got dark, it was windy, I recall, and so my brother said, "Come, and on my belly I crawled over there, and I went and got the number, and you know, disappeared. I sort of tried not to be in the assessment's view, and that's how I got the number. So I was even to get the number, you have to be lucky.
After the war, did they get the records and try to put people together again, reconstruct, and try to put people, you know, families together? Did some kind of organization try to do that?
Probably they did. Now don't forget it, I was in a lazaret for 3 months. In other words, I was sick. So when I came out, things were already better organized, and I went to this camp in Austria, and you know, I worked for the UNRWA store there and so on. So, you know, and
But
then
there was never a system set up whereby, like, with your number, you could go someplace and try to make contact with even some of the people that you were with.
no, there was, I don't know, that's a good point, if they ever kept any records from their side, you know?
Yeah.
You see, even after 45 years, you will find out something new that you could really find out. Yeah.
Were there any German soldiers that were like passionate and not like mean, that felt bad about what they were doing?
Oh, I think there were some. Predominantly, you know, there were the officers were indoctrinated Nazis and so on, and it depends on some of them were quite. I always remember now. Some of them were brought up quite well. In the German language, there's 2 ways to address a person. You say "du," which means you, like we say it, and it's also "sie," the third person is singular, which is sort of a fine form. And I recall being in this Redultau, we were building a new camp, and we had to go to the bathroom at night, and you had to go ask permission of the guard to go, you know, take a leak. So I would ask him, and the man said, "Sie, warten Sie." He says, "Wait, you wait," in a third person singular, which shows a finer form. That means that although we were prisoners, in Nazi he could say, "Du Schweinhund," you know, you pig or whatever. That's how they would address us. But he still said "Sie," which is quite you know, shows his upbringing. Yeah. Another thing is, we used to have a Lagerkommandant. He loved opera music. We had among us in the coal mine a former cantor from a Jewish man who had a good voice. And Sunday we didn't work, and he would bring this man up on a little sort of patio where the Lagerkommandant lived, and he would give him an extra pot of soup, and he would sing "O Sole Mio" and from Rigoletto, the aria, I remember. So you see, there were kind of vignettes where people still retain some kind of humanity, even among all this squalor and etc. You know? Yeah.
Did you do any other work when you were in the camps besides the coal mining?
I told you I worked on in Melk. I worked in on artillery shells. You know, and essentially I was bringing up a big, four of us with big wooden crates, and we would load up the artillery shells in there. You know, we would put the sort of inlays and you know, things like that. And you know, it was all different work, but mainly in the coal mine I worked in the fields, putting the dynamite sticks and peeling potatoes when I was lucky. Yeah.
Like when you first got there, did they ask you what you were, you know, good at, what trades you could do, whatever, or did they just tell you that you're going to do this?
Sometimes they would ask, you know, if they needed, like maybe who was a carpenter and who was a you know, tinsmith and so on. You know, then you volunteered, yeah. And that's how you were assigned to commandos, you know, to working details.
Mr. Eichenbaum,
Yeah.
I've shown the students the documentary, The Escapes of Ybor.
Yeah.
And in watching the film and understanding that over 600 prisoners were there and 300 plus did escape, one of the things that stands out in my mind is the cruelty of the Ukrainian guards toward the Jews. What light could you shed on the history, perhaps, of why were they paid off and why were they so cruel, as the Nazis were as well?
You know, it's just like, you know, we call it brown nosing. Now, as you know, the Austrians, they consider themselves that they were annexed, they were, you know, essentially conquered by Hitler. But this wasn't, my wife is from Vienna, but this is baloney. The Austrians were in the SS and they were the worst because they were trying to outdo the Germans, you see? They had the commonality of language, yes, and they, you know, they always considered themselves inferior to the Germans, you know, within themselves. That's why they had to do everything the best and show that they can outdo their masters. And this probably carries on to the Ukrainians as well. They were, you know, they had the hatred in them of the Jews for probably some other reasons as well from home, you know, where there's no separation of church and state. Everything is against scapegoatism. The priest in the church says that, you know, we had a bad harvest, it's the Jews' fault, they didn't pray hard enough and so on, you know, all this kind of scapegoatism. So the Ukrainians, they brought out that, you know, most of them, I'm not saying all of them, but some of them are inherent anti-Semites, and this was their vehicle to act up for Hitler. I still say that Hitler probably could have conquered Europe easy, and England too, if he would just let the freedom-seeking people of Russia have their little autonomy, because they would do anything for him. He was treated as a liberator, you know. But once he started to treat them as an inferior race, then they said, might as well suffer from our own. We don't have to have the German, you see.
We have them.
That's right, you see. So I think that was probably the only thing. So, like, you know, you hear about Croatia. The Croatians were not a bad number in the camps. The guards that were Croatian, you know, stay away from them. They're cruel, you know. Lithuanians also. I'm sorry, I have no prejudices whatsoever. This only applies for the times past. So please judge me that way. So I guess we'll have to part.
Any more questions?
So I just want you to know that I hope that I imparted to you some feelings and some experiences of times gone by, and that you can use it for some kind of good thing in your life. Like your principal said, that times were different, and you are fortunate to be born and live in times where we really are evolving into a better species of people, and it's up to you to continue that trend. And I just hope that you learn something from it. Yeah.
What's the book you have? Did you write it? Is that what you said?
Yeah, it's essentially from the first time I sight my sister as a little boy to the last time I see her in Auschwitz when she goes off.
Is that one
hope so. I mean, there's, the only thing that I have is, it's in, on North Main Street in Providence. There's, anybody can make a copy of it. I think it would cost about $7, $8. The manuscript, the original, is there, if somebody wants it. But I sent it to a couple of publishing houses, but you know, these days things go so slow, so, yeah.
Were there any blacks in any of the camps that you were in? Black people?
No, the only one I remember we called blacks was we saw some, there were some Jews, Greek Jews from the island of Crete. They were black because, you know, they are from the sun, I guess, or something. They were, you know, they had Caucasian features, but they were dark. Unfortunately, they didn't, with two Polish winters and they were gone. They could not, they could take the work and they could take the, maybe the hunger, but the cold plus the other two things were too much for them. Yeah.
When liberation came and you saw that first black soldier, and you saw these guys playing this strange thing called baseball.
Yeah.
What did America represent to you, and why did you opt for America as opposed, like you mentioned, you were sick and tired of fighting, you didn't want to go to Israel, but you opted for the U.S. What did that culture represent to you, the U.S. culture? As a
I really tried to examine my feelings that I really did not know much about them. It was a far-off land. Matter of fact, Canada had a better vision for us than America. It was more better food and sort of more green and, you know, the mountains and all this, the royal, you know. America was sort of a split picture, you know you had to work hard, but yet you knew there were skyscrapers and gold is in the streets if you just go get a big shovel and pick it up, you know. So that's the sort of split vision I had of America. You know, I also knew that somewhere there is some kind of relative. As a little boy, I would climb up on a closet and there was letters from America, you know, and so this was really just a choice. But since I saw them and they liberated me, that was a big point of attachment, you know what I mean? That they were the first one that came to liberate, you know.
Oh, what was their reaction, the Americans' reaction to those camps? Were they kind of really naive and disbelieving that something like this could even happen?
I don't know, probably most of them. The only thing that hurt us was that how fast they would sort of turn away from us and go with the Germans, you know, because we were emaciated and sick. And, you know, the soldiers there were a lot of Fräuleins there that they'd rather go with them, you know,
yeah,
so.
right.
You see, so right away you felt sort of like jilted because, you know, so here they were supposed to be our liberated, but they lost interest very quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah. But if you just want to pass it around.
Joy, you have a question?
Yeah.
Have you written any other books besides that one, like on your brother or your
I
parents?
wrote also a book about myself. I call it Romek's Odyssey. My name, they used to call me Romek. My name is Roman, now it's Raymond, but you know, I changed it. So I call it, and I also wrote a play. Oh, this is something maybe, do you put on plays here?
Oh, yes.
So,
They just finished a big production.
yeah, so, you see that, this is also based on, it's sort of fictionalized, and it's quite ecumenical, you know, in other words. Yeah. So maybe we can make a deal.
You're all hired. Put on the play.
If you have enough enthusiasm, yeah, okay, you give it back. I have very few. Okay. You can.
Okay.
It'd be great.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
You said when you first came to the United States, you went to New York, to an orphanage in New York. How did you get to that orphanage? Like, who were you with? Like, how did you know where to go?
I didn't.
And
We
who?
were a group. We were a group. You know, when you come to America, you under somebody's protection.
Oh, so
or
someone
auspices.
from America was with you guys and brought you.
No, once we were given over to the orphanage or so, then we were under the orphanage, you know, and we were not prisoners, but they had to account for us, you know, and also they bought you clothes and they gave you a little allowance, so it was a good thing that did, you know. Yes.
published, the Romanek story about yourself? Is that book published or?
No, it's not. Eventually, I think maybe the two of them will be together. To be, because the other one is sort of my own story. Yeah.
Those people that you said that you went to the orphanage with, do you ever see them or talk to them?
It's been so many years.
Did you ever try, like in the beginning? You know what I mean?
Yeah, it would be great to have a reunion, although we were so briefly together, you know. But you do come across, you know, we had a gathering in 1983 in Washington. It was done too late because, you know, our places changed and we changed so much over the years, but it was very traumatic. My wife is still dead set against it because I was very sick up there. You know, it affected me so much.
Okay,
Okay.
I hate to end this, but we have to, and I think in parting, one of the most important things that I, as your instructor, would like you to remember about this unit is that as long as there is man, there will always be inhumanity toward his fellow man. And that's the sad part about being human. The thing that I think Mr. Eichenbaum would like you to remember is that the tolerance and the perseverance of surviving under such dire conditions, all right, has made him the person that he is today. Thank God. And we bid you shalom. Why don't you stand up, Nadine?